Welcome everybody. Today I thought we'd discuss some aspects of good leadership. If you're looking at setting up your own business, whether that is yoga studio or whether it's simply just to refine your own business ideas around yoga teaching, around teaching fitness, or whether that's Pilates or it's a mixture of strength training, might be also yoga. And in my case, I'm also an expert in Shotokan karate. So, I can absolutely say that if you are someone who does a bit of a fusion like myself, these are some of the principles I would really encourage you to consider. As I've told a lot of people, I was lucky way back in 2008 when I first started Earth Yoga NYC, which was my studio on the Upper East Side in New York City. I was lucky to have a mentor who was also a student who was named Suzy Welch, and she's to this day, she's someone I look to as a great sage, someone who dispenses wisdom. I catch her on social media, but these days, if I want to reach out to her, she has not just time for me, but she has time for so many of her former friends and people that she teaches now in the academic world. She's an amazing human being, and I must say very Christian in the way that she is so giving, so generous, and she's an amazing human being. As I said, she led me to look at some academic principles and pillars of great leadership because she'd written so many books with her then husband. Sadly, he has passed away, but the great Jack Welch, who was the CEO of GE, and everybody knows Jack Welch in the business world. He is an icon, and he himself is just a great example and role model of someone who, through his own business practices and strategies, led his businesses into being iconic, world-class, international successes. So what I'd like to share with you today are 8 pillars of what we might call great leadership. The first pillar is really about making clear what your mission and vision is for your business. This is something that I honed over time, but that I realized very early on I knew what I wanted to create in Earth Yoga NYC, which, for those of you who don't know, it was a hot yoga studio on the Upper East Side. And so my little catchphrase, Earth Yoga NYC, your hot yoga haven on the Upper East Side. So if you break down those words, I knew, one, it was going to be hot yoga. It was a hot yoga room, and everybody expected to be a certain temperature. They knew what kind of class or classic class that they would get in that experience of attending any of the classes on the schedule. So they're pretty uniform to begin with. I'd inherited the studio from a previous owner, so we'd taken over this space and also taken over the business. We renamed it, of course, to really reflect my husband and I, Richard's hope for this new studio, Earth Yoga. And so it was a hot yoga studio, as I said, but it was a haven. And so when I used the word haven, I really wanted it to be a sanctuary. I wanted it to still represent the pillars or the principles or the precepts of yoga as we know it. So I wanted a spiritual element as well. And that came through later on in the mission and vision because we later had offerings of yoga teacher trainings. And I wanted that very much to be part of our services and part of our offerings because not just was it a hot yoga studio, but I wanted to be able to offer education, workshops, and everything related to, educating our community in those principles of yoga. So if you looked at the what I was thinking for the mission and vision, it was New York's hot yoga haven. It was very much a mixture, if you like, a blend of not just an athletic class, but it was also for anybody of any level. So you didn't have to have a lot of experience. And so there was this underlying ethos of welcoming anybody, no matter their level, meaning experience and exposure to yoga. And so everybody, including our desk staff, our teaching staff, even our cleaners, we made sure that everybody knew that our attendees, our students would feel welcome and comfortable and supported and encouraged. And that's what we wanted people to feel when they stepped foot into the studio. So that idea of haven and sanctuary and the welcoming aspect of the overall experience. So that was one of the principles that you as a good leader, you have to, if possible, make it very clear, not just to your community, but to your teaching staff, to your, desk staff, everybody, management and behind the scenes people. They need to understand what your vision is for the overall experience. So there's this idea of you as a owner or as a manager, an operator, of you conveying and communicating really with passion and with a lot of conviction what those mission and vision ideas really are. So if you can consistently convey that to your staff, to your people, then I think that slowly gets reiterated and it gets confirmed over and over again that this is what you're about. And not only in person, but back then, social media was fairly new in 2008, and we knew we had to be on social media. So we were on Facebook a lot. We started being involved in Instagram because it was not that big a thing as it is today. But we started getting involved on Instagram as well. But Facebook was big back then. So we were on there messaging about our vision, about our mission. And I think we were able back then to convince people that this was the sort of experience that they would have, that they'd feel welcome, nurtured, and encouraged along their journey. And so this is very much a strategy, a commercial strategy on my part, but it was the first principle from Suzy and Jack Welch's great leadership pillars. So the next pillar is that a good leader or a great leader will really instill a sense of confidence and energy. And by that, I mean that you're upbeat, you're optimistic, and you're this way not just with your immediate team, but you are that way with your students, with your teaching staff, and you invoke this vibe of can-do and positivity, whether it's dealing with your teacher who is having a bad day, one of your teachers who has to show up and isn't able to show up. It's, let's say, is calling in sick, and then you having to be can-do and finding a sub or finding it does happen, and it happens more than you realize. But if you have to, you step in, you have to teach, or you find a sub at the last minute. But these sort of things, the worst case scenarios, do happen quite frequently. And so it's this can-do, problem-solving, solution-driven kind of attitude. I spent a lot of time on the front desk, and, some people would say, well, why are you at the front desk? You should be behind the scenes and let the managers and let the lackeys or, your staff do most of the check-ins. But actually, in order to understand your business, you have to be there, expressing all of this passion and love for what you do, and to interact with the students, with your clients, so that you get to know them, you get to know their struggles, you understand what it is that they're dealing with, what their backstories are, you get to know their names. I mean, it's a very simple, basic idea, but if you do know people's names, you're halfway to having a proper relationship with someone, because everybody loves to hear the sound of their own name. When you're speaking to someone, instead of just saying, sorry, what's your name again? And if you can remember their name and you can engage with them and remember a few details about their life, then it's really golden. It's a bridge towards making really deep connections with people on a day-to-day basis, and continually as you see them, because our clients would come to class almost every single day. So you'd see people building their practice at the 7 a.m.s, that sometimes they'd be evening people, so they'd be at the 6:30s or the 7:30s, or we on some days had the 8:15s, and you get to know them really intimately. So you have these conversations before, after class, and you make real friendships. I mean, these are friendships that I have even today. So decades later, can you imagine? This is one of the things that I never underestimated, and I learned to realize, or came to realize rather, that this enthusiasm and this optimism obviously has to be genuine. And if you're doing something you love and something that you're passionate about, something you're good at, and I really enjoy relationships. I love yoga. So it was a no-brainer for me. It was natural and it wasn't contrived. It was very sincere. So if having that excitement and sharing that excitement, engaging with people in that way and at that depth, it's not lost on people when something is really sincere. I will go straight on to the third principle. This is an interesting one. It's about stretching your goals. And by stretching your goals, I mean mean stretching goals for your individual teachers and staff members, as well as the organization itself, so the business itself. And one example is that I would mentor a lot of my teachers because, in fact, all of my teachers, I'd always check in with them. How are they doing? How are they feeling in terms of their health and their well-being? Are they getting enough rest? All of those things in common conversation, but also we spend time each week. And I'd really encourage this back and forth and this flow of feedback. So I'd give them feedback and they'd ask me questions about how they might improve and how they might be given opportunities to maybe teach at the what we call the prime time slots, which were in the morning first thing and also in the evening at say 6:30. They were our most popular classes, absolutely packed every single day. And these obviously were those covetable classes that teachers wanted ultimately to have a stab at teaching if they didn't have a normal regular slot. So they would lobby, and of course I'd follow their evolution. I'd attend classes, and this is what I mean by keeping on top of your teaching staff, but setting goals for them and for the organization. So I would look at my teaching staff, I would help them flourish, and I would have in mind that ultimately, some of those personalities, those teachers, are really suitable to teach certain types of classes. And so I'd help to hone their skills and polish their skills so that they would ultimately be able to, I guess I'm saying that they would up level to the next opportunity or the next potential pay rate. And I will look at pay rates in a little bit, but I wanted to give people who are at the right level the right sorts of opportunities. I'm a type of person, I'm just going to rewind briefly. I'm the type of person to see a skill set of somebody and then think, okay, this person would be really good in this role or in this job designation or teaching this sort of class or leading a teacher training or co-leading a teacher training. So I really like to put people in positions of leadership in the organizational structure that gives them room and scope to evolve and grow. And so I learned all of this actually from Suzy and Jack and from reading a lot of books around business and around their business principles. And I realized that I also had to do my own learning on putting aside the ego. So in tandem with all of my learning around the yamas and the Vedic principles and the Vedic precepts and philosophy, I learned that I put aside my ego, and I know that if I am able to nurture my team, then we all flourish. So there are lots of great quotes, Stoic quotes, and also other quotes about, all the boats rising. If we're able to nourish and make sure that all people on the boat, or all, I forget the exact quotation, I'll try to find it for you, but where you see everybody uplifted and up-leveled if you put aside your sense of competition, because my success is your success. And I really saw that in terms of the yoga studio, and that we were one big family. And I don't actually say that in an insincere way. I really did feel that if one person did well, if a group of us did really well, then we would all benefit, because obviously it has these great overflow effects on the branding of the studio, the branding of each individual brand of each teacher. I really wanted to build that ethos of sharing and caring and watching out for each other and seeing if we can increase our toolkit and our skill set. So yes, we were constantly giving, or at least I was encouraging people to get more experience doing things that were slightly beyond your comfort level, and subbing classes, for instance, that were a little bit more complicated or a little bit beyond your current abilities. But you can only get better if you have the experience of being in front of a group of 26 students and teaching a primetime slot, even if you've never done it before. So that's how I think we improve. Sometimes we're never ready for an opportunity, but you become ready when you've been put in the scenario, in the context, and then you adapt. And I think that that's what builds resilience and this adaptability and in flexibility. So that was our stretching goals, pushing our staff to be trying things that are a little bit more challenging than they're accustomed to, as I said, so going beyond your comfort levels. And then for the studio, just to reiterate what I did, was I decided that after a few years of being in operation, that ultimately we had to put together a yoga teacher training. And from one year to the next, so one year we didn't have a yoga teacher training in place, a program in place, and the next year we did. It took a lot of work to put it together. And you know very well, those of you who have been involved in faculties or teaching or structuring a program, it takes a lot of preparation and a lot of focus over many months to put the content together. And I knew that that was one of the stretch goals that we had for the group, for the organization itself. I knew ultimately, again, referring to one of the earlier principles, I knew that that was going to be one of our, not just a revenue generator, but it was something that I wanted for the studio to be a hub for excellence, not just in delivering classes on the schedule, but also a hub for delivering excellence in terms of training teachers to be, you know, at the top of their game. And I'm happy to say that we were able to do that. So that was the third principle, stretching goals, or setting stretch goals rather. That's I think the way to look at it. The fourth pillar is to differentiate talent. And this is a tricky one because a lot of people will say, if you're a yoga studio owner or a business owner, you'll say, oh, if somebody has time served in your company, then the people who've been there the longest should be the ones that get the higher salaries and get the most credit and the most seniority, if you like, within the organization. I would actually offer or beg to differ, because my view is that we should differentiate. We just have to look at data. We just have to look at, in the case of yoga studios, you just have to look at attendance. And if you're, let's say, one given teacher who, let's say, I regard as a so-called rock star, who is very experienced, has an independent following, is popular, meaning every class that he or she teaches will be packed. And if that's the case, then that person should be paid accordingly. And I've always felt that a person in that position can dictate a little what their base salary is, and then what I would offer in those days. And I would, if I were to do my time again in the present scenario or present climate, I would do exactly the same thing, which is you offer a base rate. Let's say it is something like $50 to $75 an hour. And then for every person after 10, or you might have a minimum of 12, you might even make the minimum a bit lower, you would give a rate, let's say $2 to $5 per head after 12, let's say. And then if the person filled out the class with 26 people, then that teacher, the so-called rock star, would be able to earn a lot more on top of that base rate, if that makes sense. So ultimately, in some cases, some of those rockstar teachers would earn maybe $150 a class. But he or she would be very much motivated to work the room, meaning they make friends. They are there prior to the class. They are there after the class. They connect with students. They bond. They chat. They make people feel that this was a great, unique experience. And they build a bond with that particular teacher because that teacher has time for them. And you might talk about particular progress issues, or you might talk about, I'm having issues with getting into such and such a posture. How would I improve my practice? You know, all those things. The teacher works for that rate, and it all pays off in the end. And there's so many aspects to this as well. So the teacher would also work social media. They would post, and they would not only post about their own classes, but also about Earth Yoga. And they would, you know, tag the right people. And so you get a very, you know, a buzz, if you like, or a big reaction to the fact that this particular teacher has classes on the schedule on these days. And so bookings would be very clear over a whole month. You'd have pre-bookings over, in some cases, you know, weeks ahead. And so you build a lot of interest and a lot of buzz, and a lot of, you therefore get the, as I call it, the data, the stats, when you've got the statistics to prove whether someone is a so-called rock star and someone who can really be one of those people who warrants the high rate, then, you've got an argument and you can actually negotiate. And oftentimes with these sorts of situations, those teachers would be able to say, well, I've negotiated XYZ rate with Yanti at Earth Yoga, and they'd be able to negotiate similar rates elsewhere. Those were the days when teachers would move around the city and teach at different studios multiple times a day, if you are a full-time teacher, for example. So, there's a lot to say about the differentiation. To differentiate talent, it caters for the hierarchy that you'll get inevitably within a studio setting. So you'll get the newcomers who are newly minted, for example, straight out of YTTs, who are outstanding in their own right, but who want to become, let's say, full-time teachers, or if they're not full-time and they have a day job, they do still want to work at that part-time. So those are perhaps at entry level. Then you have the intermediate, and then you have the higher level people we just spoke about, who are the so-called seniors and master levels. They'd be likely to co-lead a yoga teacher training, or to be involved somehow in faculty by perhaps offering particular topics and subjects within the syllabus of a yoga teacher training, for example. But then as I said earlier, what I would offer is that those entry-level teachers get the opportunities to sub when those opportunities arise, so that everybody gets to the opportunity to up-level, to get exposure to classes that they perhaps would not necessarily get exposure to, or the opportunities to teach. There's at the same time a nice building of interrelationships within the studio, because what happens is more senior teachers take on younger, more junior teachers as mentees, and they will refer, for example, someone knows that they're going to be away on holidays, and they will ask me, could I give my subs or my classes to XYZ teachers, so that these teachers, because I know them to be the types of teachers who could teach this sort of flow or this sort of class with a similar vibe or a similar kind of energy. And so a lot of, I like to call it cross-pollination, so sharing of knowledge and sharing of experiences can happen in an ethos where everybody shares and everybody gets credited for their efforts. And so this is why I found in my experience that the differentiation of talent really does work. And if you're able to keep that ethos really balanced and upbeat and positive, then I think it absolutely can work. Yeah, attendance speaks volumes. And when you're able to look at the statistics, which we are able to do we used Mindbody at the time, but we use any type of reservation system, you can see the attendance levels, and you therefore can measure out what base rate salary each teacher actually deserves. It's a self-regulating kind of system, and I think it's one that can work very effectively. Which leads us actually to the fifth pillar, which is that great leaders or good leaders really build trust through what we call candor and transparency. And the reason why this is a really relevant principle is because even today, I have a lot of mentees that reach out to me. They're yoga teachers in the teaching world in New York City and beyond. And they say to me, why is it that I'm teaching at XYZ studio and the owner or the manager won't reply to my emails? And I just feel it's not obvious to build a business communication like I just described, with candor and transparency. First of all, everybody should have the right to have their emails replied to or responded to, but it's actually not a given. It's strange, but it's true that, and I've heard time and time again, that with teachers in this climate, often yoga studio owners or managers do not reply as a given to these teachers who might want to discuss really important issues such as pay, or, what are my obligations and rights in terms of, when I show up for class, am I meant to do the check-in? Am I meant to stay well after class? Do I have to clean up? All these things. Often I think, which is a little bit scary. I think what happens in mom and pop yoga studios is that some people think that they can set up yoga studios without really being involved or really being invested. And they think it's easy. And they think that it can operate without being regarded as a business. So what they do is they hand over the keys to the teachers, and they expect the teachers to open, do the check-in, teach the class, switch off the lights, do a quick clean, say goodbye to everybody, and lock up. And so it's, no soul, no community, no sense of building connection with your clients and with your students. Don't think that that's going to build long-term success. And there are many reasons, as I'm going through most of them. The first being that you have to be very open and transparent with your teachers, what's expected of them, and be very clear what they're getting paid to do. And unfortunately, what is happening these days is that the pay rates are very, very low. I really don't understand what has brought that about, but it is, for example, $35 an hour is actually quite typical in some areas and some studios. And I just don't think that you'll get or retain talented teachers if you insist on paying them at a very, very low rate, especially if they're quite experienced. And so this is something of concern. So coming back to candor and transparency, in the first instance, answer the emails. Don't leave it for 2 weeks. And don't leave the issues hanging in the balance. If a teacher wants to discuss their pay rate, then you should speak about it and be very open and honest and say what you can afford and what you cannot afford. And then if you cannot afford paying more than $35 an hour to your teachers, you've got to ask yourself, why is that? Am I charging enough for memberships, for class passes, and by class passes, I mean single classes and the various packages that you offer on your menu of offerings? Because just as an example, when I was running the studio, Mindbody, which is one reservation system that a lot of studios use, offers the ideas of single classes. You have the 3-class pass, you have a 7-day intro, you might have a monthly, you might have a 5-class packet, or you might have a 10-class packet, 15-class packet. You offer all kinds of options for your students because they may be attending frequently or they may not be. But you want to offer them at a rate which justifies the efforts that are made, not just for you as a studio owner to hold these classes, but also for the time that is spent by the teacher to teach. So a lot of issues there to unpack, but I think it's really important to make it very clear with your teachers what you're able to pay them up front. You're very clear even before you employ them, and to continue a dialogue with your teachers to basically be very clear and honest and open if you're unable to maintain a certain base rate for them, because there's nothing worse than a teacher who abandons the commitment that he or she may have to your studio mid-flight, or when you expect a schedule of classes to be advertised on your reservation system and online on social media and beyond, and it's all to do with your lack of clarity or it's a lack of commitment to valuing your teachers. So a lot of thoughts there, but I do think it's very, very important to be open and have that sort of discussion with your teachers from the outset. And it is surprisingly common for yoga studio owners and operators and managers not to have those conversations, which I find very, very surprising and somewhat disappointing, because again, if you go back to the precepts of yoga and the ethics and morals around just being a good human being, not being open, not being direct, not being clear and encouraging open discussion, there's a problem there if you're not comfortable with that. And then you've got to ask yourself, are you really living the yogic life and the principles of the yamas and the niyamas? Not to be, on a high horse or anything, but it's just basic decency. And I hear time and time again from my mentees that this is actually an issue, and it's surprising to me. It's something that is, I think we can do better. So this one leads me to the next pillar, which is that we should always celebrate our wins, but we should also learn from our failures. And of course, this would suggest that, when you're doing really well, then the people involved with your success should be told that they're doing a fantastic job. And so again, again, a lot of these pillars and all of these principles crossover, and they're very much interrelated. And so it goes to this idea of being open and transparent, and just not being afraid to thank people openly rather than keeping a distance and being that inscrutable, distant owner or boss manager. Yeah, I think it's important to keep a balance of the importance of the hierarchy. At the same time, though, you have to be human and understanding and compassionate, because the role or the job of a yoga teacher is very physical. It's exhausting. And I think that we can forget that is, I think yoga teachers rather, can be underestimated in terms of their value. And so it's really important to be open with your teachers and to congratulate them and to honor them and to basically acknowledge their achievements, is what I'm saying. Build morale, but always at the same time, at the back of your mind, be willing to analyze those things that didn't go so well. So what are the classes that are not doing so well on your schedule? And analyze, and again, looking at the analytics, looking at the stats, looking at figures and data to help you determine, maybe we have to do away with one or two classes that are very badly attended, and work out why that might be the case. I remember we at Earth Yoga, we tried to put on some kids yoga classes. We didn't succeed in those TOTS classes, and then we tried I think it was mother baby classes as well, because we just weren't located near any schools that would appreciate these sorts of classes. And I'm not a parent, and so as someone who's not a parent, I'm not sort of fully plugged into the school system as such, and so I wasn't networked that way, and nor were any of my kids yoga teachers. So even though I did a kids yoga training, and I did I really looked into it deeply, I realized though that as people identified our studio with hot yoga and with these very athletic classes, they didn't associate the brand with the kids yoga and with the restorative and with the quieter, the more sedate classes, or the yin yoga classes. So as a result, our biggest, most popular classes, but as biggest meaning, well, most well attended classes, were those that were identified with the brand, the hot yoga classes, and lesser towards the kids, the restorative, the yin, and the more of the quieter classes, if you like, the slow flow classes. And so that was an interesting realization. It was a good opportunity to analyze the so-called failures, or the less successful, shall we say. So it's really important to analyze why things aren't working, and to do so after you've given it an opportunity to grow. And by that I mean maybe 2 to 3 months. And if nothing's giving and nothing's showing some returns, then it's time to reassess. And keep your eye on the statistics, and keep your eye on all of the analytics that you read in your reservation system. That they do the monthly reports, and you do a check at the end of every month, and you see, okay, what the top 10 classes were, or the top 5, and who the top income earners, which classes were the top income earners. And so you can get very granular, and you can therefore know exactly what your revenue generator or your centers are. So yeah, celebrate the wins, but learn from failures. And that's a strong one. It's one that it's hard to often take on board, because you just want everything to be, you want a lot of choice on the schedule, and so you want to cover all your bases. But then we realized with time that actually it helps to specialize, and that was the big learning I had. Aside from the classes on the schedule, which were the heated classes, the other big revenue generator was our yoga teacher training, and we were known for that. And so we gained a reputation for being a great yoga teacher training program, a 200-hour. That is that's principle number 6, and that leads us to principle number 7, which is to embrace change. And good leaders are adaptable and they're also resilient. So they can anticipate shifts and changes in the marketplace. And if there are things that go awry in environmental sense, let's say one big example for us was Hurricane Sandy. When that happened, we had a lot of our teachers who were unable to make classes. And so during that period, what happened was there were one or two teachers that lived locally who could walk to the studio who took over the whole schedule, and myself included. And what we did was we gave some classes away as a kind of a donation-based class, because we knew everybody wanted their yoga because they were so stressed out. And so we packed the schedule, but we had a fewer teachers teaching. We adapted in real time because we knew that most of our students who lived in the local neighborhood would be dying for their classes, but they would also want to shower because there was no hot running water in their apartments. So we were able, thankfully, we had running water, both hot and cold. And so we had a lot of people showering at the studio. And it was a wild and crazy period. But yeah, we adapted. And, a lot of our students, many, many months afterwards remembered the fact that we had adapted and catered for all of the needs of the community during that strange period when some apartments were very badly affected, and therefore our students weren't able to take showers in their own homes. And they were still able to get their yoga, but it was just everything was tipped upside down. So we adapted. We made sure that we were able to cater for our community, and we just made do. And everybody was like a blitz spirit in many respects, and we were able to just be a different type of studio for quite a few weeks. It was an interesting experience, I have to say. Another example, I guess, of adapting and being resilient through hardship, an obvious one, is the pandemic. So even though at that point, I had sold the studio, I sold the studio in 2019, I nevertheless used those skills to adapt and to find some degree of resilience by changing our business model. So what we found we were doing was a combination of what I think everybody is doing today, which is you're doing some pre-recording, you're working on your YouTube channel, you're doing live stream, you're doing Zooms, you're doing a whole mix of in-person and everything in between. So that's what we did as we adapted our business, both the yoga and our karate, my husband and I, Richard. We found that we changed our business model. And that's what I think, as good leaders and owners of businesses, and, whatever business you're talking about, doesn't have to be necessarily fitness or wellness. But I feel like if you're able to adapt to changing conditions, that is a really great skill to hone and to polish over time as your business evolves. That was principle number 7. And we come now to the 8th pillar, which is returning now more towards the vibe of a yoga studio, is to ensure that your teachers take ownership of being part of your community. And how do you do that? How do you ensure that everyone feels ownership of the studio community? And I found through personal experience that you're able to achieve that just by empowering your employees. You're empowering your teachers to, take pride and responsibility in their roles as teachers. And part of that, of course, is that they get compensated well for the role that they play, for the classes that they teach. They cultivate that sense of ownership naturally because there's a pride in their job. There's a sense that you as an owner and as a boss, as an employer, there's a sense that you really value their input and that you value their presence as well. So in the meantime, you're building this high performance environment. You're building an environment of excellence, and everybody really rises to that level of excellence by virtue of this spoken and unspoken hierarchy we spoke of earlier, which is that you get compensated for the efforts that you put in to promoting your class, to being present, preparing for your classes, making sure that each class is a unique experience for each one of those students who is in that room with you. And with that, I think it's a natural return, if you like, on investment, that your teachers feel that sense of ownership. So a lot to say about that, and a lot to unpack on the teacher's side as well. But I do, for example, teachers can themselves really support studio owners and their community by attending a lot of other classes on the schedule, doing their own practice, supporting other teachers. There's a lot of interaction that can happen by showing you're a team player. So that's an example of a teacher being a great team player and being part of the community and joining events, workshops, things that you're not necessarily, as a teacher, you're not necessarily leading those classes, but you're still supporting everybody else who is part of the teaching staff, for example. That's a great way to show your support and to show that you're involved and you take ownership of your role as a teacher. So there is a lot more to say about each one of those pillars, and I do have my top 10 or let's say I have my top 5 tips for yoga studio owners, and I have my top 5 tips for teachers, but that will be under a different video. So that's your 8 pillars of great leadership in the context of running a yoga studio. Hope you enjoyed that, and see you in the next video.